Hello and welcome to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. I'm Tharandu Amarasekara. Now, the Sri Lankan tea industry, well, one industry that has made Sri Lanka world famous. In fact, Ceylon tea is still one of the most sought after items or ingredients for any tea time party. However, this industry has been badly affected by many different crises that has been crippling our economy. How bad is the scenario at the ground level and what is the way forward? This will be our focus today on Bisnomics. And joining me for this very special discussion is none other than Mr. Imran Akbarally, who is a Group Executive Director of the Akbar Brothers Group. Imran, welcome to Bisnomics. Absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Tharandu. Thank you for having me.
Now, Imran, we always talk about the importance of the tea industry, but we have also seen some very bad news coming from the industry over the last few months. We see the people in the industry are affected, the entrepreneurs are affected, and the problems just simply keep on spiraling. At least that's what we see from the media. Now, you are someone who I call to be having the seats to the front row of the action, or rather you are in the ring in terms of the action of this tea industry. Tell us, how badly has the tea industry been affected by the current triple crisis? And when I say triple crisis, I'm talking about the electricity issue or the energy crisis, the fuel crisis, and also the issues of inflation, the dollar crisis, and the list simply goes on.
Sure. Thanks, Tharandu. I think before I get into the specifics of the question you asked, perhaps I'll provide just a bit of context to the tea industry.
Sure.
So the tea industry is now 155 years old this year.
Since James Taylor first led the
Exactly,
first plant in Lulkondula.
So it was James Taylor who planted the first commercial crop of tea, which was in Lulakondra, which is just outside Deltota. And since then, the industry has grown from strength to strength. The highest volume we did in terms of total tea exports was back in 2012-13, I believe, when we exported just over 350 million kilos. Prior to, I'd say, the pandemic and, of course, the prevailing economic crisis, the tea industry in itself was facing a plethora of challenges. I'd say, starting from the issue of planting and our yields declining year on year, because, as you know, a lot of the tea bushes that make up the majority of the tea industry in Sri Lanka were originally planted soon after the time of Mr. James Taylor and then decades after that. But little has been done in the way of replanting at a large scale, I'd say, in the last 2 to 3 decades. So that's been an issue which has affected the actual yield of the tea crop. And perhaps when you view it in the microcosm of the Ceylon tea industry, it doesn't appear to be such a big issue. But looking at our regional competitors and the ways in which they've been able to surpass our volumes,
Correct.
And in some cases even produce similar quality tea, these problems have been further exacerbated.
And I believe that some of our regional peers, such as India, and even some of the more distant competitors like Kenya, they are getting a better yield out of 1 acreage. Am I right?
Certainly. And what we're seeing in Kenya and India is in the last year, if I take January to December 2021, both countries saw respective record volumes. I believe India exceeded 1.4 billion or 1.35 billion kilos last calendar year. Kenya's passed an incredible milestone of 500 million kilos. Sri Lanka produced, I believe, 278 million kilos last year, which is, I believe, a growth from 2020. But if you take a 5 to 6 year time span, there's been a consistent decline from the 350 we achieved as recently as 7 to 8 years ago. So the issue with regarding to declining crop was one that was being faced by the entire industry prior to the pandemic, prior to the issues we face right now. And the issues that you alluded to in your question, I'd say, have only exacerbated the pre-existing issues that our industry was facing. And so moving to some of the specifics that you asked me regarding the fuel, I believe, as just like any other industry, from the very production level at the estate, right up into the transportation, which is a key factor in the tea industry,
Correct.
to us exporters having to operate fairly significant machinery, fuel is of the utmost importance. Sourcing diesel has been a challenge over the last many weeks. I'd say months. And I think these issues, like they've affected all other exporters and manufacturers and small businesses alike, have been significant for our industry as well. An industry which I believe has over 2 million stakeholders and 1 million direct employees, which I think is a lesser-known fact about the tea industry in Sri Lanka. It's something that not many people know. When it comes to the foreign exchange issue, I think it's an interesting one. The general sense, the general perception is that a weaker rupee is good for exporters and makes exporters more competitive. I think that is the case with all export industries around the world. When your local currency devalues, it makes your exports more competitive. The problem is, if we look at the last 2 to 3 months in Sri Lanka, I wouldn't say it was correlated to the Russia-Ukraine crisis, but I'd say that was a contributing factor, along with our declining crop. We've seen record prices for tea purely in rupee terms, and the average, if you take the average purchase price of tea at the auction over the last 3 months, the increase has actually been greater than any benefit we could have derived from foreign exchange. So that's something which also is perhaps not people aren't privy to, and it's obviously a challenge for us exporters.
Correct.
Because our buyers are obviously very macroeconomically astute, and they always tell us, with your weakening rupee, surely we must get some advantage now. But we find that we're still facing the challenge of trying to make our tea competitive.
And also, I believe from a cost perspective, Imran, I believe that as a company, you do have certain investments and bringing down machinery, etc., and those require dollar payments, isn't it?
Of course. And that's been a significant factor. And if we take the absolute, if we take the tea at its very early stage, at the growing stage, I believe the cost of fertilizer has gone up 7 or 8-fold. If we compare with, say, 12 months ago to now, so that's been extremely significant, something that's incredibly burdensome for the producer. So, like just about any other industry that's affected by surging commodity prices and inflationary pressures, it's been a big factor for the tea industry as well.
And Imran, if you look at in terms of competition, let's admit there's global competition for any industry.
Sure.
Kenya, are we losing our advantage to markets like Kenya and even maybe India? Because I believe that given some of the concerns that was there about Sri Lanka's ability to supply tea,
Sure.
I believe the last few months have seen record numbers of tea coming from areas like Assam in India, which I believe is a region in India specializing in tea.
Yep.
So are we losing the advantage, or yet again, is it something that has been gradually happening, which is now exacerbating or getting worse due to the current situation? What are your thoughts on this?
I think, you put it very correctly. It's something which has been occurring for some time. If we take a 20-year horizon, we have lost substantial market share to Kenya in countries such as Pakistan, the UK, and even I'd say, so Pakistan, the UK, and I'd say Russia as well, although that would be more in the last 10 years. Depending on how you look at it, we have lost substantial volumes to these countries that are able to obviously produce tea, at a much lower cost, and naturally more price-sensitive markets over time have developed and acquired new taste for these cheaper teas, and they've been able to bring their cost down. However, in the strong Ceylon tea markets where we have established brands,
which countries would those markets be?
Predominantly in the Middle East, from Iran, Jordan, Iraq, to even Russia, despite having lost out, I'd say, around the time it was, I believe, it was towards the end of the Obama administration, I believe, when soon after the annexation of Crimea, when the Russian sanctions were imposed for the very first time, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, was when we actually first lost out big time to Russia. But despite all the challenges, Ceylon tea still is exported in large way to Russia, but of course not without the threat of Kenya. And the issues that we face right now, like you correctly said, are only exacerbating the issue further. And the declining crop raises some serious questions about the actual viability of the persistent price increases. And it's an incredibly uncertain time for all. But I don't think this is limited to the tea industry. I do believe this is something which affects and is affecting all commodities around the world, whether they're food-based or not. Yeah.
Imran, we saw the headline news that Japan has reduced the purchasing of the Ceylon tea. How bad is that impact? And especially the impact of that news that, a big market like Japan is moving away from Ceylon tea. Is it a sign of things ahead, especially if the current crisis of the fuel, the energy, fertilizer crisis, if these things continue? Is this a sign of things ahead?
In the case of Japan, I feel it's the issue. I believe is twofold. One is, of course, an extension of the general challenges that the Ceylon tea industry is facing due to prices reaching all-time highs. Naturally, all countries are finding it harder to import Ceylon tea as they have to, absorb much higher prices than they've ever been used to in the past. If we take Japan in isolation, I believe the macroeconomic climate in Japan has also been a contributing factor. If we take May 2021, exactly 12 months ago, the Japanese yen was trading at about 110 to the dollar. Today it's trading at 130, which while it may not seem like a severe depreciation when we look at currencies in this part of the world, for a currency that's historically been as robust and strong as the Japanese yen, to see a 20% decline in 12 months is like really astronomical. And I believe that's what's also created this an aura of general macroeconomic uncertainty. That, if a currency as strong as the Japanese yen can fall the way it has, then what does it mean for the rest of the global currencies and perhaps reserve currencies as well? So I believe that's been a very big factor.
And also, I believe Japan is still the third or fourth largest economy in the world as well. And they are somewhat, the news that one of the biggest economies in the world is moving out of our market or reducing. I think that also has a bit of an overall dampening of the aura about the industry as well, isn't it?
Whilst I agree with you, I do believe that due to the quality of tea that is bought by Japan, the Ceylon tea portion, which is a very premium line of Ceylon tea, which is predominantly exported in branded format. I do believe that those of us in the value-added space will be able to weather this storm, as we have in other markets. That, of course, does not mean without difficulty. Like anything, it will be with considerable difficulty. But I believe the brands who have established themselves, who've consistently delivered during lockdowns, pre-lockdowns, and the various circumstances we've had to deal with over the last 2-3 years, I do believe there is still some upside, as the Japanese consumers have a very refined taste and very, very quality discerning customers. And for that reason, I do believe Ceylon tea still has a future in Japan. I just do believe we have to ride this rough wave, so to speak, over the coming months.
Imran, I believe. What has been the impact of the fertilizer issue on the Sri Lankan tea industry? Because when you talk of fertilizer, we always talk about all the other agriculture, but we sometimes tend to ignore the impact on tea. But I believe the tea industry is also severely affected, and a bag of fertilizer is now 3-4 times the cost of what it used to be, and people are finding it difficult to afford. And sometimes it's only available in the black market, and so many issues like that. What has been the impact on the tea industry due to the fertilizer crisis?
So the fertilizer crisis has of course had a significant impact on the tea industry, as it has on many other industries in Sri Lanka. I believe the price or the cost incurred by the producer for fertilizer has gone up 7 or 8-fold if we look at the last 18 to 24 months. I believe that in the foreseeable future, this will continue to be a challenge, because it's not something that's whilst originally we thought it was a very domestic issue, Now, I believe with global food shortages and concerns about global food security,
Correct.
I fear this particular issue may only get worse.
Correct. And also because Russia and Ukraine are two of the biggest providers of fertilizer,
Fertilizer,
and that issue is there. So as you very correctly said, this is becoming a global issue now.
And what happens is when you have global issues that have a knock-on effect on already existing domestic issues, unfortunately, it's a very bleak outlook.
Imran, we are going to come back to you on more details on this. Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. I'm Tarandu Amarasekara. Our focus today is on the tea industry of Sri Lanka, and we are in conversation with Mr. Imran Akbarally. Imran, let's talk about another burning issue. I believe now this issue has been a burning, I would say, factor and a problem even before the pandemic, the labor issue, because for many years we have been hearing about how the labor available is diminishing. Current labor force doesn't want their children to be involved in this industry, and so many other issues like that. In fact, there were talks about having to get down labor from other countries at this rate. What are the main issues concerning the labor in the tea industry?
Okay, so I think before I answer the specifics of that question, perhaps I should just give a bit of context.
Absolutely.
To
the context is everything.
To the industry. So the Sri Lankan tea industry is predominantly divided into two core sectors. First, we have the smallholder sector, which represents about 72% of the total land extent that's cultivated in tea.
Correct.
So what I mean by the smallholder sector is, this is predominantly in the Ruhuna, Sabaragamua region, as well as
low-grown teas,
the low to medium-grown regions. And this comprises, like I said, this is 72% of the total tea cultivated land. And the smallholder sector is quite simply a model whereby the land is owned by smallholder farmers who every week sell their leaf to a nearby factory. And these are private factories who also would have some of their own land where they cultivate tea. But typically, these are private factories which have been owned by generations upon generations. And whilst they have their own tea land as well, they predominantly work with a group of smallholders. So, for example, I have my factory, and perhaps I have about 100 acres or so of tea. That's barely enough for 10% of my production or less. So the majority of my actual green leaf that I buy comes from the smallholder farmers, maybe in a 2 to 3 kilometer vicinity or less, depending on the concentration of tea factories in that area. In this segment of the industry, the smallholder is effectively an entrepreneur because he owns his own land, whether it could be anything from 40 perches up to 2 acres and beyond. And the smallholders, of course, have faced a challenging time during the pandemic with the increased cost of fertilizer, but this has been in a large way subsidized by the private factories to whom they sell their leaf to, which is obviously a great thing. The second segment of the industry is the regional plantation companies, which you would have read of. A lot of these companies are listed on the Colombo Stock Exchange, who manage thousands and thousands of acres of tea, and they employ thousands and thousands of workers collectively. And I believe a lot of the issues that are brought up in the media about the tea industry are centered on this segment of the tea industry. And I think the challenges surrounding the plantation companies is incentivizing workers at a time when there are perhaps more lucrative careers they could opt for with similar skill level or slightly more skill level. And this the challenge of retaining labor has been a very, very challenging one, because
and why would that be?
Because a lot of people when a lot of people you'd speak to would basically confess that although they are somewhat content in the work they're doing, they would not want their children doing the same, and they'd encourage them to perhaps get some training in hospitality, perhaps look at an alternative career, whether it be Uber, whether it be any other form or any other service-based vocation that would
Correct.
earn them significantly more income. And this is a challenge, I believe, which will only grow. And I think that's the key concern from those in the plantation segment, company segment. Yeah.
As a nation, as a tea producing nation, Imran, are we lagging behind when it comes to production technology? Because we hear about how some of the other regional countries are even using drones now in their production processes. They are able to get much more yield out of an acreage. Is it a problem with Sri Lanka lagging behind in production technology? Because we do hear that our production technology is getting outdated and the dollar crisis is not making it easy to upgrade it either. Perfect storm, if you ask me. How do we put this storm in a teacup?
I think that would be one of the most pressing issues in the industry, which for which I don't think there is an immediate solution. I think it is true, in fact, that we have lagged in terms of technology when you look at some of the other tea growing nations. But I believe that there's also a bit of I believe the reasons for us lagging are numerous. One perhaps being the general apprehension towards machinery in terms of producing the same quality of tea. There's a very large segment of Ceylon tea that's exported at a very, very high price premium to parts of the Middle East, to Japan and other nations where there's a general skepticism about automation from a quality perspective of the end product. Right. And I believe with time, like with anything, technology will address these issues. But I believe in the past that may have been one of the reasons why there was a general sort of reticence towards adopting technology. But of course, that's no reason by any means for us not to look forward and adopt these methodologies ASAP. And then from a yield perspective, I do believe the advent of technology will teach us how to be more efficient with our land use. As we have of course, we don't have the land extent of Kenya, and certainly not India when it comes to the sheer, the vastness of the tea, the available land that's currently cultivated in tea. So, of course, that being said, I do believe the advent of technology will be incredibly insightful for the tea industry, and perhaps I firmly believe will teach us new ways of doing things we perhaps have only known how to do in one particular method for many decades.
Understood.
And perhaps that's all the more reason why there's a bit more hesitance when it comes to adopting change.
Imran, what support do you feel that the government should be providing? Because growing an industry like the tea sector, keeping it strong and stable is, yes, the companies are doing their bit, the commercial players are doing their bit, but I believe that the government also has a role. As a member from a leading enterprise that is into the tea sector for generations and for decades, what would be the expectations of the players in the tea sector from the government? What is the role that the government should be doing in your perspective?
I think the government has currently, the way the tea industry is set up, I believe there is plenty of government involvement at various stages of the tea supply chain. Tea, much like rubber and coconut, are fairly formal industries which have proper administrations that have been put in place for many decades. And what these organizations have been able to do is build a lot of credibility. For example, with GI, which is a geographical indication. As since 1999, Ceylon tea has been recognized by the famous lion logo, which is simply the lion from the Sri Lankan flag embedded into a logo, which signifies pure Ceylon tea of a certain quality. And since 1999, this logo has been recognized by the European Union, and it's been exporters have been permitted to use it after proving that they meet a certain standard. I think in in this context, there is perhaps more that can be done. If you take India, for example, regions in India have very, very strong GI recognition. For example, Darjeeling has done such an incredible job marketing themselves as the champagne of tea that Darjeeling in itself is perhaps known better than India as a country when it comes to tea.
Correct, correct.
I think the
And what
same.
exactly is a GI indicator?
It's a,
And how do you get it? We heard about Sri
Yes.
Lanka getting it, and we also heard about this new tea trail
Sure.
being promoted as
Yeah.
well. But what exactly is a GI indicator?
A GI indicator is essentially a formal badge of credibility and a confirmation of a certain quality being met for a particular geographic region where a particular, say for example, agricultural crop is grown. So like in the case of India, they were successful in doing it for Darjeeling. I believe in Sri Lanka, steps are being taken to provide GI international status, so that's recognized by the European Union and so on and so forth. I believe steps are being taken to recognize our regions as internationally recognized logos. For example, Ruhuna, Sabaragamua, Uva, etc. We have many regions which, if given the adequate credibility and given the adequate compliance at a state level, I think companies, exporters could really capitalize on this and create more niches in what is, of course, a very quality-driven export crop. As you know, Ceylon tea has never been the cheapest tea, but we've always held formidable positions in the markets where we are most present because of the quality that we provide. So I think in these areas, definitely there is more that can be done from a regulatory perspective.
And in terms of the young professionals who are entering the tea industry, what is your advice to them? Is there still potential to develop a successful career in this sector? Because there was a time that entering the tea industry was seen as a path to a good career growth, good career prospects. Of course, the tea industry was growing at that time, etc. But do you still believe, Imran, that same potential is there for young professionals?
I firmly believe there is potential for young professionals, but more so I believe there's potential for young entrepreneurs who want to enter the tea space, who have an idea that perhaps would require a slightly different way of thinking. We've seen brands that are completely vertically integrated in Sri Lanka, essentially from leaf to cup, as they say. We've seen homegrown brands that are started by, say, second generation family members of estate companies or plantation companies who are now promoting their own brands in retail, e-commerce, and various other platforms. So I see tremendous potential in that space, and I do believe there's so much potential at the most premium end, whether we call it specialty tea or artisanal tea. If you just look at Japan, that produces 90 million kilos of tea a year, or if I go by last year's figures, which is a third of what we produce, but manages to generate about 4 times the foreign exchange that we currently generate.
It's all about the value addition
on the value addition and quality. And it goes on back to the topic of GI I mentioned before. If you take Japan now, there are certain estates, certain garden marks which have become so prominent and so well known amongst leading food and beverage players around the world. So you not only do you see incredible retail potential, there's incredible B2B potential as well, because even the larger beverage manufacturers, whether they be subsidiaries of the Coca-Cola company or PepsiCo, are finding that their customers are becoming more discerning.
Correct.
So whether it be from an extraction point of view, I think there are so many avenues in and around the tea industry that can be explored and tapped into for younger entrepreneurs who want to perhaps take a slightly different.
Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. We are in conversation with Imran Akbarally on the current status of the tea industry and, most importantly, also on the topic of family business. How are family businesses adapting to the current times? What are the challenges that they are facing? Imran, now we spoke about tea. Now, tea has been the cup of tea of the family business enterprise that you represent for many generations and decades, and very successfully too. Now, in terms of a more general idea, how are family businesses adapting to the current crisis? Because we do see that in the good times or when the economies are doing great, though the family businesses might not be performing at that soaring level, at the same time we do sometimes see at a crisis situation, family businesses are resilient. We do see them standing tall, strong and proud. Tell me, how are family businesses adapting to the current crisis, the multiple crises that we are facing, and especially from your own experience at Akbar Brothers?
I think in the context of the current economic situation that was, of course, preceded by the pandemic, we've observed that family businesses, like you very correctly said, when times are good, everyone, as you say, thinks on the same page, and there's an incredible amount of unity and camaraderie, which helps the business to move forward. But I think when the values are firmly held strong, which is something that I can vouch for in my experience, you're also able to weather the tougher times better.
Correct.
As there's a lot more unity, trust, the core values of the family business really come into play and are put to the test during these tougher times.
The values that the family business
stands for.
That's why they say if you don't stand by something, you'll fall for anything and everything.
100%. And I firmly believe that all family businesses have a duty to obviously protect not only their interests, but you're constantly thinking about the generations that will come after you, putting them in a better place than putting them in a better place and the business in a better place than perhaps when you joined the business. In the specific context of our company, Akbar Brothers, we are a third generation family business. So I'm a part of the third generation, and we are entering our 53rd year of operations. Whilst tea is predominantly the core business, we've also diversified into the renewable energy sector,
Pharma,
the pharmaceutical sector, the leisure sector, environmental services, real estate, and various other manufacturing industries as well.
Okay.
And what we found is that over the years, we've been able to grow strength from strength by applying the same values that took our tea industry to where it is, to these other businesses as well. We adopt a very transparent approach. Most people actually are amazed to see the way in which we operate, as we all sit in one room, all of us on the board of directors. We have very clear, open communication, no cubicles, no, it's all very transparent. Very empowering for the younger generation, as this help is always available when needed.
Correct.
We know we're given a substantial amount of autonomy to carry out our duties, but then also when needed, our father's generation and founders' generation are always available, always ready to help whenever we seek their input. It's always very comforting, and I believe it's essential for any healthy family business to operate.
Now, a research that was carried out a few years ago clearly showed, and I'm not trying to challenge what you said here, Imran, but in open media it was communicated, a research done by several leading consultancies said that in Sri Lanka, most family businesses don't really survive beyond the third generation. They say the first generation is who builds it, the second generation grows it, and then the third generation drives it to the ground. And of course, there have been certain instances, certain groups in Sri Lanka that has faced that. But my question to you on this regard is, when that transition took place, as you said, from your father's generation and then the founder's generation, what are the lessons of transition that you would like to share, so that if anybody who is watching this show is having a family business, thinking of the transition, and then wondering, how can I do this transition right, so that I will make sure it will be a strong and more successful company after myself, what are the lessons of transition that you would like to share with us?
I think, firstly, your point about the statistics surrounding family businesses beyond the third generation, I believe it's less than 4% who actually succeed beyond the third generation when you take a global, the global statistics. And yeah, like you said, I think there's another phrase, rags to riches to rags as well. To, you know,
R to R to R.
R to R to R, yeah, as you correctly said. I think the fundamental thing here is that it's, I believe, in the current context, I think we need to look at family businesses in the context of the issues that we're seeing around the world. This ever increasing uncertainty, surging raw material prices, ever increasingly uncertain logistics scenario. You sort of operate in an environment where sometimes you can only plan for 24 hours or less.
Correct.
So the importance of communication is incredibly important. Clear, coherent communication, something which has been instilled in our family right from our founders. We're constantly able to obtain feedback as and when it's needed, constructively. We're allowed to, we're from a very early stage, we're given sufficient autonomy to actually take full accountability for what we do, and thereby actually, I would argue, learn perhaps more effectively, and have those core principles actually ingrained a lot further. Nothing like learning from a mistake, and I think many of us in our first year, whatever, you'd make sometimes small mistakes, sometimes slightly more significant mistakes, but it's always taken in the right spirit, as that forms the basis of success. You know, these little failures that come along the way, I think eventually form or lay the foundation
Correct.
for success. And I think it's a generational thing as well. I firmly believe that family businesses that demonstrate the flexibility of startups, being able to make quick decisions and being able to change their, maybe some of their most fundamental beliefs, especially in times like this where so many things globally have taken place that have shaken up the global economy.
Correct.
Things that we would have always said, oh, it would never happen, have happened.
I mean, the best example is Tom Peters in his famous book, In Search of Excellence, said, stick to the knitting. Stick to only one thing that you're good at. Don't try to do everything. But today, diversification is the way forward.
I think diversification is incredibly important, so long as you don't spread yourself too thin.
Correct.
They say that breadth gives you perspective, but I think depth gives you expertise. You need to find a balance between those two things.
Correct.
Expertise and breadth. Have a balanced sort of perspective on what's going on around you, whilst truly understanding what your core competencies are.
Basically, the sweet spot of diversification.
Of course. And
Imran, in terms of what professionals should know when they join a family business, because you get a lot of young professionals, managers, they might have been working for a large conglomerate or a MNC, and then all of a sudden they see a career opportunity and then they join a family business. Of course, it's going to be a bit of a culture shock because the family is invariably a part of the organization. It's at the heart of the organization. What should young professionals know and be ready to adapt and change? Maybe when they are coming from a MNC or a conglomerate background to a family business, what are the culture shocks and what are the operational shocks that they should be ready for?
It's an excellent question. I think for any professional who's joining a family business in whatever capacity they may be joining, should firstly really understand some of the cultural nuances of that company, and as early as possible, they should make every attempt to align themselves with those values and principles of the said family business. And I think depending on the fit of depending on maybe the intrinsic fit of the individual with that company, it could be a very easy process. Sometimes, or on the flip side, it could be a very long, arduous process, which is why sometimes you see fairly, very qualified C-suite executives not last very long in family businesses because perhaps that fit isn't there, or there's maybe a lack of willingness to compromise perhaps a bit or to adapt their own ways. I think there are so many different structures that a family business could follow. For example, you could have a family business that is inherently very hands-on, where the family is extremely involved in the day-to-day operations. whereby whereby professionals would have to work very closely with said family members who perhaps would operate as board directors or maybe heads of a particular unit of the business. On the flip side, you have companies that have professionalized to a much greater degree, where the family members, so to speak, are, for example, board directors, but not in an executive capacity, perhaps only at a board level and zero operational
or monitoring level.
Exactly, like you correctly said, a governance level, and very little operational input. In which case, a professional may find it, in some cases, easier to assimilate, or in some cases, harder to assimilate, if they're used to working in an environment where there's a lot of involvement from the owners, for example. So it really, really depends on the fit, the cultural and the value alignment of the professional and the organization and the family.
Imran Akbarally, it was an absolute pleasure interviewing a young business leader such as yourself. The ideas you brought in, and more than anything, I'm mesmerized by the knowledge you have about the industry and how well versed you were with it. Indeed, you did mention that globally too, very few businesses survive beyond the third generation. You are from the third generation, but I'm quite sure that you will grow the business together with your other third generation members of the organization and with the other supportive members that you have. You will grow the business and make sure that the organization you represent goes on to be one of the world-class organizations for the foreseeable future and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us, and wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Tarandu. Thank you for having me.
The Ceylon tea industry, well, the potential to grow is still there, and especially if you are a family business, make sure that the transition happens smoothly and the right support systems are in place. These were the key areas that we focused today on Bisnomics. I'm Tarandu, and no matter what business you may be in, have a profitable week ahead. I'll see you with the next episode.